I won't make you do a show of hands, but I'm sure if I asked many of you to think back to your school career, many of you could bring up an experience like Mr. Berry's, where someone in your class or someone within your school building made you feel less than. I'd like to share a similar story with you this evening. I was 10 years old and in the 5th grade, and my entire class was sitting on the carpet for morning meeting, as we often did in the mornings. And my teacher announced to the class that a student had been selected to go to the state capitol and interact with policymakers and lawmakers and talk about their experience as a student in Pennsylvania. That student was me. I was very excited. Even as a youngster, I was interested in policies and what made things work. And I was just so excited that I would get this opportunity to talk to people who did this for a living and share my experience and the idea that they were interested in what I had to say. My classmates came up to me afterwards and offered their well wishes and congratulations, but one student walked up to me and said, "You know, my mom works for the school, and the only reason you were selected for this is because you're a student of color, and the school has to show that they support students of color, so I wouldn't be that excited." We'll talk about taking the wind out of your sails. I sat with that moment that day and for 27 years afterwards, and I thought about it every time that I encountered a situation in which I had an accomplishment. I thought about it that the day that I got my first job acceptance. I thought about it the day that I got accepted into college. I thought about it the day that I got accepted into graduate school, and I have thought about it almost daily throughout the time that I've been studying for my doctoral degree. Is it because of my merit, or is it because they need to show that they support a student of color? Throughout my doctoral research, I realized that this wasn't an uncommon occurrence, and Mr. Berry highlighted that very nicely for us today, and I'm sure, again, you all could call up a situation in which you felt less than, or you questioned yourself due to an interaction you had in a school building. I remember driving to a conference with a colleague of mine, and we were talking about our research and why our research was needed, and she said, your research is so important. I remember our first class together when you talked about the way that you were looking at trauma and distress that happens in schools. And I remembered an instance where my teacher made a comment about my hair. And I never talked about it since because I didn't think that it was a big deal. But that day he made this comment in front of the class laughed. And we only had 3 days at school, but I pretended I was sick for those last 3 days because I just couldn't go in and face them. I was so embarrassed. And many students, just like Tajma, just like Mr. Berry, just like some of you, carry this distress, this trauma, these incidents with us for years and years after we've graduated and left the building, even if the students that maybe inflicted that pain might not even remember. It seems trivial, but it's not. So why does this matter? It's very well established in research literature that the distress that comes from incidents like this can have a tremendous impact on the body and the brain. So in a situation where you're stressed, you have your stress hormones coursing through your body. You've got your amygdala, which controls your emotion, that primal feeling. That gets enhanced, and your hippocampus, which is in charge of the features that you would need for the learning process, that kind of lessens in favor of the amygdala because your amygdala is just trying to protect you. And what we learn is that these Stress reactions can, over the course of time, become cumulative. So even those distressing events that may seem small, that may seem trivial, they can have a lasting impact on the brain and the body, and they can further join together to create an even bigger impact. So this is the reason why there is a movement towards trauma-informed classrooms. But what I argue is that we're not really looking at the whole problem. We're looking at what students are experiencing outside of the classroom and what they bring into the classroom. And teachers are being trained how to navigate those traumas and those moments of distress. But what we are not looking closely at is the trauma and the distress that is being experienced within classrooms, within school buildings. And they don't have to just be interpersonal. It can be through policy. It can be through the way that we have certain holidays off and other people don't have their holidays off. It can be policies about how students wear their hair or what type of clothing they wear or what type of language they use. These can all have a tremendous effect on the body and the brain that are not conducive to the learning process. We also don't acknowledge this, and we don't prepare caregivers to talk about their experiences with their students so that their students know how to navigate these issues when they come to school. And we don't validate that this happens, and this happens often, and we need to unpack and process these experiences so that we can find healing. So what do we do? What do we do about this situation? I propose that we need to do 3 very specific things. 1, we need to acknowledge that sometimes, even inadvertently, classrooms can be a place of harm. Number 2, we need to realize that students need to be validated in their experiences. We need to allow and share the process of what we've gone through and unpack those experiences so that they have models for what to do with these experiences. Number 3, researchers like myself and psychometricians and testing experts, we need to think about ways that we can measure the impact of these interactions, because when we think about the opportunity gap or the achievement gap, as I do not like to call it because it is an opportunity gap, some of that is caused by the fact that we are not empowering our students to be able to process the things that are happening in their classrooms that can allow the learning process to happen more effectively. So how do we do this? The acknowledgement piece. Let's start to talk to our students. Let's start to talk to our young people. I was 37 years old when I realized that there were multiple emotions besides sad, happy, angry, and Hulk angry. And I think that we need to talk about what are the vast variety of experiences and emotions that we can experience. I saw an emotion wheel and I was instantly like, that's a lot. And my therapist said, that's called being overwhelmed. Who knew? So we need to start having these conversations with our students so that we are equipped and they are equipped to know what they are feeling, know what their reactions are so they can begin to process them. We need to acknowledge that this may not come from a place of maliciousness, but these things happen within classrooms. We need to validate and empower our students. We need to allow them to share and not diminish what they're feeling, not push it aside, but really have real conversations about what is bothering them and how it's impacting them, because they can carry these situations with them for years to come. And finally, I call researchers like myself, my colleagues, testing experts, psychometricians, to really start to look at these constructs. Because historically in the United States, we have tested what we have cared about, and what we have cared about is what is perpetuated in classrooms. So why not begin to unpack some of these constructs that are really affecting our students and the learning process and create some of the challenges that we are trying to mitigate. So hopefully, as we begin to work through this, and I hope other people will join me, even those in the audience, just talking to your children, talking through your own trauma and distress, we'll begin to develop classrooms that are more and more conducive to learning and truly trauma-informed. Thank you.